Welcome, everyone. This is this afternoon's edition of Stories for Healing. As you know, if you've found your way here, we're a bunch of storytellers who've gotten together and said, this is a world right now that's filled with division and antipathy and stress and tiredness and just really kind of aching for some beneficial change. Um, it's not just our community, it's not just our country, it's countries around the world, it's communities around the world, it's the whole world. And so as storytellers, we kind of ask, what do we do? How do we respond to this? And our answer is, well, tell stories. But we want to tell stories of a particular kind. We're not interested in telling stories about I'm right and you're wrong, or this is a good way and that's a bad way. We're interested in stories of healing, stories that help us kind of bridge those fractures that have come between us, stories about reconciliation and growth. And so today I'm very pleased to have a special guest, Jim Kissane, who is going to be sharing a story with us. Jim, please tell us a story.
Thank you, Jim. I'd like to tell a story today, a personal story about healing. And the story begins at 3 o'clock in the morning in the room where they do CAT scans at a local level 1 trauma center. And in this large, cold, empty room, there's me being ushered into the tube while they're taking little slices of pictures of me. Now, to back up a little bit, how did I end up there? Well, I ended up there because, while getting my Christmas decorations down, I misstepped and fell through a ceiling, landing on the concrete floor 15 feet below. Now, it was only the inspiration of God that the paramedics who picked my limp body up off the floor and put me into the ambulance realized that what I probably had done was a spinal fracture. And so instead of taking me to the nearest hospital, which was only about 5 minutes away, they took me to the level 1 trauma center in our community where they felt I could get the appropriate level of care. And that takes me to 3 o'clock in the morning in the room where they're doing the CAT scans and my body slowly moving into the machine. And as I'm going into the machine, there's all kinds of thoughts that entered into my head. What's this all about? What have I done? If it's serious, what's my life going to be like? And I didn't have to wait too long for an answer. For you see, the technicians that were working back behind the way, looking at their screens of all the different slices of Jim going through the CAT scanner, had left the intercom on. Now, maybe they figured it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And 3 o'clock in the morning, most sane people are asleep. Have you ever tried to sleep on a plastic backboard where you're strapped in and completely unable to move? Doesn't happen. And I was wide awake when I heard them say, "Oh man, look at this guy's back. What a mess. I'm guessing he's never going to walk again." When I heard those words, my world came to a complete dead halt. At that moment, I lifted up a quick prayer. I said, "God, I've really done it this time, haven't I? I guess I need to leave this in your hands." And immediately I burst into laughter. Now, you can imagine the two gentlemen that were back reading the screens, what must have been going through their minds. Here's a guy that probably is never going to walk again, and he's laughing. Now, besides the distraction of the fact that you're supposed to stay still in there, that didn't seem to be a concern. I am laughing my butt off. And why? Well, not a microsecond after lifting up that prayer in my heart, I got an answer to that prayer. And the answer to the prayer was, you actually think that you've been in control of your life? You're a dummy. I got control of this. And that's what got me laughing. And at that moment, there was a wave of peace that swept over me. And by the time they finished the scan and moved me back out into the room, I was sound asleep. The following morning, I woke up in my hospital room where they had stabilized me and they had me strapped down and in a rotabed so I couldn't do anything that would further irritate my injury. And a young neurosurgeon walked in. And he looked over me and he said, I've looked at your scans and I think we might be able to help you out a little bit. Helping me out a little bit sounds pretty good to me. I didn't ask any details because obviously I wasn't really sure what had happened. I hadn't seen the details of the diagnosis other than the fact that I knew I had broken my back and it was serious. I had a comfort at that moment, thinking that this surgeon who had come into my room had gifted hands. And I was trusting that God was going to guide his hands in surgery. And 2 operations later, I emerged from the hospital, and the surgeon had, in fact, worked to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And when I left the hospital, I was in a full body plastic shell. They call it an orthotic shell that's fit to the patient in cases of back injuries to completely immobilize you during the healing process. Now, to get an idea of what I look like, have you ever seen a picture of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Big plastic shell in front, big plastic shell in back, the legs coming out at the corners. That was me. The only difference is mine was dull gray, not the Ninja Turtle colors, but I thought that could come later. I got home and began my at-home recovery. The afternoon of the first day, I got a call, actually my wife got a call, from the fellow that owned the company I worked for, who lived up in Washington, D.C. She had mentioned by phone that I had just gotten out of the hospital, that I was incapacitated. Could she take a message? He said, oh, tell you what, I'm coming down to see Jim. When she told me that, I thought, wow, that's great. Marshall is coming down from Washington to see me, to visit me, to be here because of my accident. He showed up the following day, and my wife had moved me into the den, had me propped up in my chair. He was sitting on the other side, and it didn't take him 5 minutes to let us know what the intent of his visit was. I've decided that I am going to close this office because you're not going to be available to do your job of sales and account management for several more months. And doesn't make sense to keep the office open. And with that, I was out of a job along with three of my other coworkers. That was not one of the best days in my recovery, but my recovery process continued. Within a couple of weeks, I was able to start walking around. The neurosurgeon said the best exercise for me at that time was walking. So I began my process, initially a few steps, then a little bit longer. And by the end of the first week, I was able to walk out to the street and back. And when I got out to the street, I discovered a neighbor of mine who had recently suffered a stroke had been given a similar rehabilitative therapy. And so every day, twice a day, Nancy, my wife, and I, and Roger and his wife would go walking the neighborhood. And when we were walking the neighborhood, wonderful things were discussed. We discussed how blessed we were to have the ability to recover, where some people had not. We discussed the fact that we had both been given the gift of good health care. We discussed the future that lie ahead of us, and it gave me great hope. And it gave me a sense of shared pain with others that were going through a similar experience and being able to walk in their shoes. And despite the things that I had originally thought of as a loss, I was able to take a look at my personal experience and now the experience of my neighbor, and seeing this as a plan for new discovery, for new growth, because it became clear to me as I was getting back to full recovery that it always was God's plan, that there was something that our Creator needed me to do that could not be done from a wheelchair or a hospital bed. And that's my story of healing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. What an amazing story. What an amazing story. Um, and you're right. We often face obstacles that can seem insurmountable, and how we are able to transform them into opportunities is, if we're fortunate and blessed enough to have that ability, how amazing that can be. I wonder, do you still remember that laughter? I somehow think you do.
Yes, I do. And my knee-jerk response to the question of how you were doing today, which is a common thing that we all encounter, uh, my response to that always sounds like this. Uh, I am really grateful that I am able to wake up, swing my feet over to the side of the bed, and get up without any human or mechanical help.
Because you know the difference. You know the difference. Well, again, thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to remind people that we are doing this storytelling twice a day. Um, we are doing it because we all need the chance to heal, to be transformed, to find ourselves in circumstances that are feeling dire, and be able to find a way to see a lane of opportunity that comes out of that. Now, we can't do that ourselves. Part of the things that Jim talked about are all the people who did the right things at the right time to make that possible. Several who didn't, but the people in our lives that can do that. Well, how do we find them? We find them by opening our hearts and making ourselves available to others. And you know what ends up happening is we heal and they heal. So I want to encourage you to share these stories with your friends, with others, to come back and listen to the ones you haven't heard yet. They're all on a YouTube playlist, and but most of all, to keep your hearts open to the opportunities that the world can provide us with, if we're just open to seeing them and accepting them. Again, thanks so much. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you, Jim.